Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith visited Lethbridge on Monday. We will explain what brought the UCP leader to town. Bridge City News has an exclusive one-on-one interview with federal Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. Hear where he stands on a wide range of issues. And 97 people have died and hundreds more were injured as intense fighting continued in Sudan. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has the latest.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Premier Danielle Smith was at the Sandman Signature Hotel in Lethbridge for a luncheon event on Monday. Now, the event was hosted by the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce. Chamber CEO Cindy Bester says it was very important for the Premier to visit our region to discuss how the province will continue to support small businesses, not just now, but into the future.
We're economic drivers, and it takes a community to drive the economy. But business, we have the opportunity to grow and to expand with new labor force, with new innovation. And I think it's just really important to keep in mind that we have the energy, we've got the connections with post-secondary, with our partnerships with the government, so we can move things fast.
Now, Premier Danielle Smith has recently come under fire for saying she'll only be taking one question from reporters moving forward. And during the Chamber event, Smith didn't take any questions from the media. UCP Lethbridge East candidate Nathan Newdorf also had his official campaign launch on Monday, and we'll have that story for you coming up on Tuesday. Now, in response to Premier Danielle Smith's visit to Lethbridge and are not taking any questions from the media, NDP Lethbridge West candidate Shanna Phillips is reacting to the UCP's new media policy change. Phillips says this change is cowardly.
It takes voters for granted here in Lethbridge and throughout southern Alberta. The way that we speak to the public is via the media, and we need to always be accountable. I know I learned all of those skills from watching my leader, Rachel Notley, through being Premier, through being opposition leader, through her 15 years as an MLA. She has never shied away from questions. She has never shied away from talking to the public via the media, and it is just disgraceful that we have a Premier who now thinks that she's above the rest of Albertans, and she's above talking to Albertans via the media.
Now, Phillips' competition is Cheryl Seaborn, who's the new UCP Lethbridge West candidate, following controversy from the previous candidate, Tori Tanner, who stepped down. Tanner accused Lethbridge teachers of showing pornography to students and subsequently resigned following a video of her making the claim on social media. Seaborn is a registered nurse, a University of Lethbridge alumna, and a recent recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for her work with the Kainai Nation. She'll be going head-to-head with NDP Lethbridge West candidate Shanna Phillips. We asked Seaborn what it will take to dethrone the incumbent Phillips.
She's a formidable opponent, there's no question about it. I think that people, though, in Lethbridge West would like to see a positive change. I am certainly receiving that feedback. That's what I'm working with as I move forward, is that, I will return your phone calls. I will be in my office to hear what you have to say. It doesn't matter to me who you voted for. I'm there to listen to everyone. I'm there to listen to the needs of the residents of Lethbridge West, and I think that there is just a hunger for that to happen. I need to get out and meet people, and that's what I've been doing, and responding to the inquiries and the concerns that people are expressing.
As part of her campaign strategy, Seaborn says she's focusing on healthcare, tackling crime, and strengthening the economic opportunities for business owners in Lethbridge West. The province announced changes it says will help strengthen career education programming. The modifications will be based on recommendations from the Career Education Task Force. Officials say they will include increasing access to off-campus education, reducing financial barriers, expanding teacher training opportunities, and ensuring effective program evaluation. Education Minister Adriana LaGrange says these changes will help high schoolers who are looking at potential career options upon graduation.
These programs support eligible school authorities to offer more dual credit learning experiences for students in grades 10, 11, and 12. We did see some great uptake for the last school year, and I look forward to the new intake dates being posted later this month. Alberta's economy has momentum. And as we continue to focus on diversification, it is critical that we prepare tomorrow's skilled and professional workers with the training they need to keep our economy moving forward for decades to come.
Officials say the task force's report was developed after a review of career education programming currently available and engagement with education partners, business and industry partners, along with everyday Albertans. Well, we had a wind warning for Lethbridge once again here on Monday. Wind gusts up to 100 kilometers an hour. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, will the winds be dying down anytime soon?
Yeah, so that wind warning and that 100K wind that we saw earlier today did actually taper off to 60K. That's going to taper off even more this evening to 20 kilometers per hour. So that's the good news. The bad news is all that sunshine we saw earlier today, well, that's going to be replaced by showers and even some flurries beginning this evening. So we're looking at a 30% chance of showers tonight, changing to flurries after midnight and to Tuesday morning, seeing more flurries. That's going to change to showers by the afternoon, but we're still sticking in those double digits there for Tuesday, high of 12 degrees. Now, I wish I could say that's the end of those flurries, but no, there's going to be more coming up later this week. I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details. Hal?
Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Alberta Motorcycle Safety Society says bikers will be out on the roads now, especially as the mercury slowly increases. Drivers and bikers are being reminded to share the road and abide by all of the laws. Now, an official with the Motorcycle Safety Society says for riders, it's best to always keep far enough back from other vehicles when you go out on the roads to give yourself enough time to react.
Should the vehicle in front of you brake abruptly, you have the ability to do your emergency swerve around them or emergency stop. There's also, times where things fall off of other vehicles. Like I said, securing loads, you want to be able to have emergency maneuver availability. When you're coming up to stoplights or stop signs, you want to make sure you're looking in your mirrors behind you and not stop so closely to the vehicle in front of you that you can't get out of the way if by chance that vehicle behind you isn't seeing you.
Motorcyclists are also being reminded to always wear protective gear like helmets and leather jackets when riding. Camping season is officially underway in Waterton Lakes National Park, such a beautiful area. The townside campground offers 246 spots for people to reserve. Now, officials with the park also say there's a lot of wildlife in the area, so beware of that when booking a spot.
Make sure that you store any food and food-related items, including cosmetics, in a hard-sided unit such as your vehicle, trailer, motorhome, rather than left out on your picnic table or at a picnic shelter. Should you see a bear from your vehicle, please be sure that you're staying at least 100 meters away. And the best, if you're out on one of our many enjoyable trails, the best way to avoid seeing a bear is to make lots of noise and, if possible, travel in a group.
Now, campsites can be booked directly through the Parks Canada website. A new report by British Columbia's chief coroner says more than 1,600 lives have been lost in that province due to illicit drug use in the first 9 months of last year. That's the largest number ever recorded in the first 9 months of a calendar year in BC. According to Lisa Lapointe, 71% of incidents involved people between the ages of 30 to 59, and 79% were male. Illicit drug toxicity is the leading cause of unnatural death in BC and is second only to cancers in terms of years of life lost. Since a public health emergency was declared in relation to the province's opioid crisis back in 2016, more than 10,500 British Columbians' lives have been lost to illicit drugs. The Public Service Alliance of Canada has put the federal government on notice. The country's largest federal public service union says if a deal is not reached by 9 p.m. Tuesday night, then 155,000 employees will walk off the job on Wednesday. This comes after mediated contract negotiations between the union and Treasury Board continued over the weekend. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the government knows it must support public servants.
I think it's important to recognize that the cost of living has been a challenge for many, many Canadians over the past year, over the past years. We also know that the pandemic was extremely difficult, and it was the federal public service that stepped up in heroic ways, whether it was delivering the CERB, whether it was delivering support to small businesses, whether it was delivering the public health supports that were there to help the provinces. A lot of people work very, very hard through difficult situations. There's good news that inflation is coming down. All the experts predict that it'll be down to much more manageable levels by this summer. But at the same time, we recognize that we need to make sure that we're properly supporting those who work in our public service.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Canada, a suburb of Ottawa, on Monday, with an important announcement on innovation and technology. Trudeau says telecommunications company Ericsson is expanding in Canada, and Ottawa is happy to be working with the company officials to help improve internet access for so many Canadians.
I'm happy to announce that our government will partner with Ericsson Canada to advance research and development towards next-generation 5G and 6G networks. Down the line, this partnership will mean faster and more secure wireless services for people at home and in workplaces, and will also support research in other cutting-edge fields, including artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. Our investment will help create and reskill hundreds of jobs here in Ottawa and in Montreal.
Bridge City News has an exclusive one-on-one 15-minute interview with federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre coming up. Poilievre talked about the rising cost of living and the increase to the federal carbon tax this month. Poilievre says should he become Prime Minister, he will follow through with his promise of eliminating that carbon tax altogether.
I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax because when you tax energy, you tax everything. Because everything either has to be heated or moved, and energy is required to do that. So this energy tax makes everything more expensive. A Poilievre government will axe the carbon tax to bring down inflation for Canadians.
CPC leader Pierre Poilievre will also discuss affordable housing and how a Tory government would address the opioid and crime issues in many of our cities. That's coming up later in our broadcast. CBC says it is taking a break from Twitter. The public broadcaster says it is pausing its use of the platform a day after Twitter labeled its main account as government-funded media. Tory leader Pierre Poilievre has pushed for the new label. Twitter's policies say the label applies to accounts that have varying degrees of editorial involvement by the government. The publicly funded broadcaster says its journalism is impartial and independent. Critics, however, have called the CBC a propaganda arm of the Liberal Party of Canada. You know, there's still far too much anti-Semitism taking place in our country. That's according to a report by B'nai B'rith Canada. The group's CEO, Michael Mostyn, says even though the rate has dropped just over 1% in Canada, so much more has to be done to combat the hate directed at Jewish people, especially online and in Ontario.
There were 2,769 recorded incidents of anti-Semitism in 2022, a slight but almost insignificant drop of 1.1% from last year's audit. 2,056 of those incidents took place online, representing over 74% of the total. Of the in-person incidents, nearly 85% constituted anti-Semitic harassment. While most provinces trended downwards last year, Ontario jumped over 64% in incidents since 2021. Acts of vandalism increased from 264 to 404.
Gun battles, airstrikes, and shelling shook Sudan's embattled capital city on Monday. It's the third day of heavy fighting between the army and a powerful rival force for control of the country. The weekend's death toll rose to 97, with another 365 people injured. There are reports that the clashes are between rival generals behind the 2021 military coup that derailed Sudan's transition to democracy. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says the fighting in Sudan looks similar to that of a civil war.
This is an almost civil war. This is an insurgency group that is fighting the country and the military now, as of this morning, having the upper hand. But again, those casualties are rising. Paramilitary group is not going away anytime soon. They're fighting for power. They're fighting to reseat this government, and the military is keeping up. So, of course, this is becoming very bloody, picking up, again, a lot of momentum, and we're keeping our eyes on that. And, of course, that death toll is rising. It's rising as of last night. It grew exponentially, and we'll keep our eyes on it here at the Foreign Desk as well.
Lisa Daftari will also chat about an American Air National Guardsman who's been charged with espionage following leaked documents of the war in Ukraine. She'll have details coming up in the second half of our program. Italian police seized around 2 tons of cocaine that was found floating on the sea near Sicily. Officials say a surveillance plane spotted the drugs near the port of Catania. Authorities say the drugs were worth an estimated 400 million euros. Police estimate the trove is one of the largest ever captured in Italy. Well, it was on this day that the Americans tried to topple Cuba's Fidel Castro but failed. The 3 astronauts from Apollo 13 splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean after a ruptured oxygen tank crippled their spacecraft, and Ford rolled out its first pony car, the Mustang. This is Today in History for April the 17th.
April 17th, 1961. Hundreds of Cuban exiles trained by the CIA invade Cuba's Bay of Pigs, trying to topple Fidel Castro from power. But the invasion fails, a political embarrassment for President John F. Kennedy, just months after taking office.
This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator. While we could not be expected to hide our sympathies, we made it repeatedly clear that the armed forces of this country would not intervene in any way.
1970. The 3 astronauts of Apollo 13 splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean, days after a ruptured oxygen tank crippled their spacecraft on their way to the moon. 1790. Benjamin Franklin, author, publisher, inventor, and one of America's most famous founding fathers, dies in Philadelphia at age 84. 1837. J.P. Morgan, a financial giant in American capitalism during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, is born in Hartford, Connecticut. And 1964, an automotive legend is born. Ford rolls out its sporty new convertible, the Mustang, at the New York World's Fair. It's an instant hit. Today in History, April 17th. David Melendi, The Associated Press.
Well, we enjoyed a fairly warm day across much of southwestern Alberta, but lots of strong wind. And how long will the wind last? Full weather details are coming up. You know, Category 1 hurricane winds begin at about 119 kilometers an hour. We were just below that in some regions here in southwestern Alberta. We had wind gusts up to 100 kilometers an hour. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it appears like a real mixed bag this week in the Windy City. Strong winds, rain, even a chance of flurries this week before it begins to warm up again.
Oh, we're going to have a mix of everything this week, Hal. What can I say? It's springtime in Alberta. Okay, so flurries starting after midnight this evening, lasting into Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, we're looking at showers, 12 degrees for a high, so we're still sticking in those double digits, so not too bad. Not so much for Wednesday, though. You can divide that in half for a high of only 6 degrees. Looking at showers on Wednesday, periods of snow on Thursday, a high of only 0. And then on Friday, that's when we will finally see that sunshine again, 4 degrees for a high. And as we get into the weekend, we're looking at our double digits again. So 11 for a high on Saturday, 13 for a high on Sunday. So shaping up to be not quite a bad weekend after kind of a crazy week with all those flurries. Average high for this time of year, 13 degrees, average low, -125. That was our high temperature on this day back in 1980. And on this day back in 1953 was the chilliest, which was -12. 6:35 is when the sun rose this morning. Our sun set this evening at 8:28 p.m., giving us 13 hours and 53 minutes of daylight, so almost at that 14-hour mark. Now, speaking of wind warnings, Victoria had one today, but those winds should be tapering down to 30 km by tomorrow. 60% chance of showers and a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm there. 9 degrees for a high, 10 for a high in Vancouver. Same thing, 60% chance of showers, risk of a thunderstorm. Mainly sunny skies tomorrow in Edmonton. Should be seeing some increasing clouds throughout the day. High of 10 degrees, 11 for a high in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud there. As we get into the rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon looking at a lot of rain, seeing 5 to 10 millimeters of rain actually expected. 3 degrees for a high, 11 for a high in Regina, looking at 40% chance of showers mixed with some flurries and 50 to 70 K winds also in Regina. Winnipeg looking at a high of 9 degrees with increasing clouds. As we look to the central part of the country, Toronto seeing mainly cloudy skies. skies tomorrow after rain and snow this evening. 5 degrees for a high tomorrow, 8 degrees for a high in Ottawa tomorrow, 40% chance of showers. Montreal sitting at 9 degrees for a high with a mix of sun and cloud. We're going to be seeing a lot more precipitation as we move out east. Fredericton looking at 2 to 4 millimeters of rain, but a high of 16 degrees. Halifax, lots of rain, 10 millimeters expected there, 10 for a high, 12 for a high in Charlottetown. In Charlottetown, also looking at 5 millimeters of rain. As we get into St. John's, Newfoundland, looking for at a high of 2 degrees with mainly cloudy skies and onshore winds. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Rogers is moving 300 international Shaw call center jobs to Western Canada. Company officials say the move means customers will be served by a team with roots in the communities where they live and work. The positions will be based in Alberta, BC, and Manitoba. Rogers plans to add 1,000 additional customer service representatives across the country. The move is in response to Ottawa's requirement that Rogers creates 3,000 new jobs in Western Canada as part of its $26 billion purchase of Shaw Communications earlier this month. Ottawa is providing more funding to support Ericsson Canada on developing and creating 5G and 6G networks. Ericsson says the 5-year research and development partnership will put Canada at the forefront of global development in next-generation communications technologies. Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne says this announcement is a big win for Canadians as we move forward with the next generation of networks.
And the project by Ericsson means that an investment of almost $500 million, hundreds of new jobs which will be created both in Ottawa and in Montreal. But also, very importantly, we're going to be reskilling a number of people because we're moving to the next generation of networks so that we make sure that all the workers of Ericsson will be able to thrive in this new economy. So it's a big win for tech workers. I would say, Mayor, it's a big win for Ottawa. It's a big win for Montreal. But it's also a big win for Canada's innovation ecosystem that we're building.
A new report from Desjardins says young educated workers today are earning more than in previous generations, but women are facing declining mental health and ongoing barriers in Canada's labour market. For the report, Desjardins compared the earnings of Canadians who graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1991 to those who graduated in 2001. They found the younger cohort earned several $1,000s more each year, adjusted for inflation, suggesting the return on education is rising. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 62 points on the day to finish at 20,641. The Dow was up 100 points to 33,987. The S&P 500 was up 13 on the day to 4151, and the Nasdaq was up 34 points to 12,157. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.69 to $80.83 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 16 cents to $2.28 U.S. Gold was down 3 cents to $19.95.16 U.S. an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $25.03 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.43 per bushel, barley's at $9.12, canola's at $17.50, and corn is at $10.54 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1 to $175.75. Feeder cattle were up $2.15 to $205.55, and lean hogs were up 13 cents to $71.88. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.65 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, a new report by BC's chief coroner says more than 1,600 lives have been lost in that province due to illicit drug use in the first 9 months of last year. That's the largest number ever recorded in the first 9 months of a calendar year in British Columbia. Since a public health emergency was declared in relation to the province's opioid crisis back in 2016, more than 10,500 British Columbians' lives have been lost to illicit drugs. Coming up, an exclusive one-on-one interview with federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. I chat with Monsieur Poilievre about the opioid crisis here in our country, the impact of the carbon tax going up, and how a Poilievre government would make life more affordable for Canadians. That Q&A is on deck. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Enjoy a fun evening with your spouse at Mark Gunger's Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage event taking place May 12th and 13th at Miss City Church in Lethbridge. Through his hilarious humor, Mark Gunger shares the difference in men and women's thinking and ways that couples can come to understand each other and build strong marriages. Tickets are $45 and can be purchased online. Visit Miss City Church Facebook page for the link. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help make sandwiches, sort incoming donations, assist with Foot Friday, and many other opportunities to serve, receive training, and to provide support for this important cause of bringing hope to the hopeless. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
You may have heard a certain politician say Canada is broken. Broken because of high inflation and the rising cost of living, making life unaffordable for so many Canadians. Now, the man who's been hammering the federal government on the recent record is the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Pierre Poilievre. And Mr. Poilievre joins us now from Edmonton. Pierre, welcome to Bridge City News.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about your Canada is broken comment. Many would argue that the rising cost of living has absolutely nothing to do with the Trudeau government, but it's more of a worldwide crisis. How do you respond to that?
It's worldwide among all stupid governments. Those that printed money to fund their spending over the last 2 years have inflation. It's very simple. I didn't say that Justin Trudeau's government was the only incompetent government in the world. I said it was among them. The American government printed money, so did the European Union, so did countless other countries, and they all got inflation. But you know who didn't get inflation? Those that protected their money, like the Swiss. So tell me this, why is it the Swiss have low inflation while the rest of Europe has high inflation? Same supply chains, same needs, same geography, totally different inflation rates. Why? Because the Swiss have their own money, the franc, whereas the Europeans have the euro. The European Union printed cash, the Swiss central bank did not. The Swiss have low inflation, the Europeans have high inflation. Very simple. You print cash, you get inflation. I warned Justin Trudeau that if he printed money, we'd have inflation. What do you know? I was right. And it continues because his inflationary deficits bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest we pay. That is entirely predictable. So my common sense plan to bring home lower prices is to cap spending, cut costs, and cut waste in government to bring down inflation and taxes. I'll bring in a dollar for dollar law. Every time my government brings in a new dollar of spending, we'll find a dollar of savings to pay for it. We'll eliminate $1 billion at the CBC. We'll cut corporate welfare. We'll scale back on contracts for consultants, which gobble up $20 billion a year. All these savings will bring down and eliminate the deficit, balance the budget, and combat inflation. By the way, I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax, because when you tax energy, you tax everything, because everything either has to be heated or moved, and energy is required to do that. So this energy tax makes everything more expensive. A Poilievre government will axe the carbon tax to bring down inflation for Canadians.
Yeah, the carbon tax went up again on April the 1st, making it that much more expensive for Canadians to fill up their cars and heat their homes. Why do you think the message of how much Canadians are struggling right now is simply not getting through to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Because he's out of touch. He spends his time with the elites at the World Economic Forum that support printing money, government takeovers, and control of our lives. And they're all supporting, they all support this agenda because it makes them rich. The inflationary policies enrich the global multinationals as their asset values rise, but it destroys the working class as their purchasing power falls. Justin Trudeau spent $6,000 on a hotel room for one night, and he sent you the bill. That's the lifestyle he's accustomed to living. I have a different background. I was born to a teenage mom who put me up for adoption to school teachers that raised me in Calgary to believe that it didn't matter where you came from, it mattered where you were going. Didn't matter who you knew, but what you could do. That's the country my wife came to as a refugee, and the one we want our kids to inherit. That's the country we're going to restore, where hard work pays off, where the common people are respected, where we bring home jobs and opportunity to our people.
Now, a recent survey found that 60% more Canadians per month are expected to use food banks and other support programs that are available. The federal government recently offered some financial support to low-income Canadians and our seniors, but you say it's simply not enough?
Well, I say it's just pouring fuel on the fire. Whenever you send out checks by the government, all that does is bid up the cost of things. The answer is to stop raising prices in the first place. So instead of taxing our food with a carbon tax and inflating our prices with big multi-billion-dollar deficits, and then sending out checks to compensate people for the damage you've done, why not just stop doing the damage in the first place, right? Cap spending, cut waste, to bring down inflation, and taxes axe the carbon tax. Instead of creating more cash, why don't we create more of what cash buys, grow more food, build more homes, produce more energy here in Canada? Think of it this way. You got 10 loaves of bread and $10. It's $1 a loaf. If you double the number of dollars to 20, but you still only have 10 loaves of bread, well, now it's $2 for each loaf. So instead of doubling the cash, what if we double the number of loaves of bread we bake? So you have 20 loaves of bread with $10. All of a sudden, the price of bread's gone down to 50 cents a loaf. So that's the equation. Stop creating cash. Start creating more of what cash buys. And that's what a Poilievre government will do. It's common sense. So let's bring it home.
Let's talk about Bill C-11 for just a moment here. Now, members within your own party, including Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, have expressed major concerns over this bill. She says Ottawa should not regulate what you see, hear, or post online. Now, the federal government says it's simply supporting more Canadian content. How do you see it?
Well, what's Canadian content? The government doesn't decide what's Canadian content. The 39 million Canadians should decide that. It's ironic that Justin Trudeau, of all people, is talking about promoting Canadian identity. He has said Canada has no identity. That is his view. He says we are a post-national country with no distinct identity. And so how could he possibly have a bill that promotes Canadian identity by controlling the internet? It's not about promoting Canadian identity. It's about promoting him and his woke ideology. He wants to put the woke CRTC in charge of manipulating social media algorithms to determine what you see and say on the internet. That's the problem. I don't believe that we should have a tiny clique in Ottawa decide what you see and say. I think your clique should decide what you see and say. I believe in a free internet, and that's why Pierre Poilievre government will axe C-11 and restore freedom of expression for Canadians.
Now, we have a major opioid crime and homeless crisis in many cities across Canada, including right here in Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta. Pierre, let me ask you, what is your solution for addressing these very important issues?
It's common sense. We'll replace the NDP Liberal catch and release for repeat violent offenders with jail, not bail. Those violent offenders who've committed many crimes, who get arrested anew, should be behind bars, not out on early bail or parole. 2, I'll stop giving out taxpayer-funded drugs. So-called safe supply, in theory, was supposed to give addicts drugs that wouldn't kill them. It's done exactly the opposite. They take the government-funded drugs and they sell them to kids. Why? Because they're not powerful enough. And so they sell them to kids, take the profit, and use it to buy fentanyl. That kills the addict. It gets the kids hooked on the hydromorphine provided by the government. The kids find after a while that's not strong enough. So what do? They sell the hydromorphine to another kid, who then gets addicted, and then they buy fentanyl and they kill themselves. So my policy is rehabilitation and treatment, not taxpayer-funded drugs. Finally, I'm going to sue pharmaceutical companies that caused the crisis in the first place. They're the ones that flooded our healthcare system with opioids. I'll sue them, and I'll use the money recovered to pay for the treatment and recovery that's required. So to summarize, jail, not bail, for repeat serious violent offenders. 2, stop taxpayer-funded drugs. Instead, go with treatment and rehabilitation. And of course, finally, sue Big Pharma to make them pay for it.
You know, we have a severe doctor shortage across many provinces, including right here in Alberta. The UCP Provincial is doing its part by bringing in more internationally trained physicians and creating a scenario to incentivize more students to get into the healthcare field. What is your solution, Pierre, federally to the healthcare crisis here in our country?
Well, there's two common sense solutions. First, I would say that these idiotic vaccine mandates have to go. Believe it or not, there's still hospitals that have vaccine mandates in place that shut out our doctors and nurses and deprive our patients of treatment. Get rid of the vaccine mandates now. They were never justified, but even if you supported them at one point, how is it possible that you can go into a nightclub and kiss a perfect stranger smack on the lips, but you can't go to work without a vaccine? It's obviously not science, it's politics, and it needs to end so we can get our doctors and nurses back. Two, we need to stop discriminating against immigrant and foreign trained doctors. We need 40,000 doctors in Canada. We have 20,000, almost 20,000 immigrant doctors banned from working in their field. Why? Because they were trained abroad. Why not test them and whether they're qualified to meet our standard? This is what I'll do. I'll bring in a national Blue Seal standard for all the professions that involves a test so that an immigrant professional can get an answer within 60 days of applying to work in a profession based on their tested ability, not based on where they come from. And then if they do get licensed, they can work anywhere in Canada, move around the country. We already have a red seal for the trades. Let's bring in a blue seal for the professions. Second, I'll back up 30,000 small study loans for immigrants who need a short time off work to study up to the Canadian standard and get licensed to practice. And three, I'll put in place a system that allows future immigrant professionals to begin credentialing before they even arrive, so that right when they get off the plane, they're licensed to practice, get into our hospitals as doctors and nurses to serve our patients and build big, powerful paychecks for themselves and their families.
Now, here in Alberta, we not only rely on agriculture, but also the oil and gas sector. If the CPC were to form government, what legislation would you cancel and what bills would you bring forward to not only support our farmers, but also the energy sector?
I'd repeal C-69 and C-48. C-69 is the anti-energy and anti-pipeline law that the NDP Liberal coalition brought in. That coalition bill has blocked pipelines, blocked the Tech Frontier Mine, and countless other projects. I'll repeal that. Secondly, I will support natural gas. One of the greatest gifts we could give the world to reduce greenhouse gases is to replace coal-fired electricity with clean Canadian natural gas. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas beneath our feet, but we cannot get it to market because we don't have a single solitary export terminal on either of our coasts, even though there were 18 of them proposed when Trudeau took office. The Americans have built 7 in the same time as we built 0. The Germans built an import terminal in 194 days. We haven't built a single export terminal in 8 years. What I'll do is give quick, responsible permitting to build natural gas liquefaction on both the west and east coast. We have massive advantages over the Americans. We have a shorter shipping distance to both Asia and Europe, and we have cold weather, which means it's 25% cheaper to liquefy gas here than it is in this U.S. Gulf Coast. So a Poilievre government will quickly approve these projects. We will liquefy that gas, put it on a ship, send it to Asia to replace dirty coal fire with clean Canadian gas, and we'll ship it over to Europe to break European dependence on Putin and turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people. It's common sense. Let's bring it home.
How about maybe the potential of bringing back Energy East?
I'm for that. There's no business right now that's proposing it. Energy East would have been fantastic. If we had it in place today, we'd be moving 1 million barrels of Western oil to the East Coast, which could have been going to Europe to replace something like a fifth of all the Russian oil that the Europeans are buying. But of course, Trudeau killed the Energy East pipeline. The NDP opposed it. I would support it if a business came back. Obviously, you'd have to see the specific proposal. It has to be a good, environmentally responsible proposal. But in principle, I think a national pipeline makes sense.
Pierre, my kids are leaving Southern Ontario simply because they're going broke. They say, Dad, we can't handle it out here anymore. We can never afford a house out here. The cost of living is through the roof. Small bungalows built in the 50s and 60s in Toronto and Vancouver are still selling for over $1 million or more. So what will it take to make home ownership more affordable for Canadians, especially young Canadians?
Well, it's very simple. build homes and bring down interest rates. It's not a complicated formula. We have too few homes and too high interest rates. That's why it's expensive. So let's just unpack the problem here. First of all, it's not a global problem. It's not a problem it's not a long-term problem either. It's a here and now problem. Housing was cheap 8 years ago before Trudeau. You could buy a house for an average house, 450 grand when Harper left office. The average mortgage payment on a new home was $1,400. Now, the average house costs almost $800,000 and the average mortgage payment is $3,200. The average down payment has doubled as well. The average rent has doubled. And Canada has one of the worst housing bubbles in the world. Vancouver is ranked 3rd in the world for the inaffordability of housing, ahead of Singapore, London, England, Manhattan, and countless other places with more money, more people, and less land. We have the fewest houses per capita in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. That doesn't make any sense. How is it possible that we have expensive housing? We have more land, lumber, and labor than anyone else. The answer is government gatekeepers block housing construction. We're ranked 64th in the world for the time it takes to get a building permit. It takes 7 to 10 years to get zoning approved for a new house, a new community. So this is municipal, but here's what a Poilievre government will do. I will demand municipalities speed up and lower the cost of building permits, or I'll cut their infrastructure budgets. I'll give a building bonus to those municipalities that speed up permitting, and I'll bring in fines for those who block building. I'll require every federally funded transit station be surrounded by and even have building over top of by high-density apartments so young people and seniors can live right next to the bus and train. I'll sell off 6,000 federal buildings that we don't need and turn that into housing. I'm going to sell off brownfields that are not being used and turn that into housing as well. And I'll support the trades so we get more of the people that can actually build the housing. In other words, we're going to get the gatekeepers out of the way and bring homes people can afford. And then on interest rates, does the federal government set interest rates directly? No. But its monster deficits put upward pressure on rates. When you balance the budget, that tends to bring interest rates down. And so I'm going to get rid of the deficits so that rates can get back down to a lower level so their mortgage payments are more affordable.
Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, thanks so much for joining us today from our provincial capital in Edmonton.
Wonderful. Great to be with you, my friend. It's a real pleasure. I can't wait to get down to Lethbridge to see you in person. And let's keep building the common sense of the common people and bring it home.
You may have seen a lot of the images online of the massive protests taking place across the Netherlands. Farmers bringing so many of their tractors and combines into the cities, unhappy with some of the potential legislation the federal government in Holland wants to bring forward. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us now from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles. Lisa, why are farmers in Holland so angry right now?
You know, this is a great story of representation, exactly what governments are meant to do, and what those who are in government are supposed to do is represent the masses. Farmers were not happy with some of the legislation that would be passed. This is environmental legislation that would affect farming, if it would affect just all sorts of cattle. They wanted to go after cows. A lot of the, again, environmental regulation. Again, you know, we're entering this era of, you know, green, but we don't talk about the consequences of that regulation and what it would do to those who are in that industry. And that's exactly what these farmers were trying to tell the government, the Dutch government. So, I mean, these scenes are amazing. You see these tractors coming onto the highways and letting people know. And exactly that, they went to vote, and They won 20% of vote, which is 15 seats, which is a very, very significant win and a constituency where they will now have their voices heard. They will be able to vote. They will be able to be a real part of that decision making, since they are a certain segment of the population and they cared enough to come out and vote and engage in peaceful protests. And it's really a great story. The opposition, I just want to add here, very similar to what we're seeing in all parts of the world, look at this as a left versus right issue, which is interesting because, as I said, they're the farmers' coalition. Just like, you know, in the United States, you can compare it to unions, right? Teachers union, farmers union, etc. But the opposition looks at these farmers as a right-wing coalition and look at them as extremists who might be against a lot of other regulations that they would want to pass and be against a lot of other laws that the left deems important. So that is why there was opposition to the farmers, and again, majority rule. So they did get what they wanted in terms of constituencies.
Lisa, some of the leaked Pentagon documents, which ended up on social media, reveal that both Iran and Nicaragua discuss ways to counter U.S. influence in Latin America. What kind of countermeasures are we talking about here?
You know, we've known about Iran's growing influence in Latin America, throughout the continent, for a very long time now. And a lot of lawmakers here in the United States have tried to bring attention to this, to say, look, the Iran regime is at our footstep, you know, knowing that they're trying to build that kind of influence and try to have a presence there. So what the Iran regime has done is grow this influence through their proxies, Hezbollah, and also try to gain favor on the ground. They build these mosque centers and cultural centers and things like that. So the influence that they wanted to build is to curb the US's influence there, meaning to have a very pro-Iran regime, a pro-Shiite influence in Latin America, and to have an anti-American. So they get into the media, they get into newspapers, they get into schools and these cultural centers and mosque centers. So they really try to brainwash the people down in Latin America as to be pro-Iran regime. They've also gotten seats in government. You have Syrian officials, you have again these Hezbollah officials being a part of the cultural landscape right now in many of these Latin American countries. So their presence is growing, their influence is growing, and this is something obviously to really keep an eye on in terms of the future and what the Iran regime is trying to gain just south of our border.
Absolutely. Lisa, the Air National Guardsman arrested by federal agents for allegedly leaking classified Pentagon documents faces charges of espionage. Guardsman Jack Teixeira, an IT worker, allegedly uploaded hundreds of pages of sensitive documents about the war in Ukraine into a Discord group chat.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, and it's embarrassing to say the very least, both to our friends and enemies. I think they're looking at the United States and wondering why a 21-year-old had access to this information, and not just that, but access to spread that information, and was able to do so. Obviously, he's in the IT world and had access to very sensitive information that perhaps he shouldn't have had access to because of the vulnerability. And here we see why that went very, very bad. And you know, the fact that this information is coming out, a lot of it is embarrassing to our foreign policy and to our friends and enemies alike, to see that this kind of information can get out, and really what was going on behind the scenes. For example, that we knew the Biden administration said that this is a dire situation in Ukraine, not a war that can be won, but yet trying to convince countries like South Korea and Israel, who may have more assets than basically the ratio of what they're giving, to give more to the Ukraine war. So what gives, right? Again, here we're seeing the influence of Iran's regime in Latin America. We saw a lot of secrets about the Chinese and their influence and how they're growing. So a lot of things that shouldn't have gotten out that, again, weaken our foreign policy, weaken our presence on the global stage, and just not a good look for us.
Lisa, a story by the Washington Post says that U.S. intelligence noted that recent heightened Chinese military activity will obscure their ability to pick up early warning signs of an invasion of Taiwan. Now, U.S. officials said it would be very difficult to ascertain what constitutes out of the ordinary activity, considering all of the military movements taking place by China.
Exactly. So imagine there's so many mini provocations that they will never know what constitutes a real provocation. Well, here's a little tip for the Biden administration and our military assets. These are provocations and they all count. Meaning, if China did not have a real goal in mind and an agenda to invade Taiwan, well, then why the provocations? So if they say that they're going to do something, I would believe them. And if they are showing us through their actions that they're going to do something, why not believe them? What are we waiting for in order to really count that as an invasion or a provocation? Or what line are we drawing to actually call that a provocation? The second question then becomes, what do we do about it? Are we looking to arm Taiwan? Do we even have the assets to arm Taiwan after getting involved so deeply in the war in Ukraine with Russia's invasion there? So there's a lot of secondary questions, but I am really stuck on the primary question, which is what constitutes an invasion? Let's assume we're already there. What do we do next? And I think that that's what the U.S. government should be preparing for right now.
Let's circle back to Iran for just a moment here. Authorities in that country have shut down over 150 businesses in a 24-hour period for not following the country's strict Islamic dress code, which includes a requirement for women to wear headscarves in public. Now, Lisa, police shut down 137 shops and 18 restaurants.
Right. So that's exactly what the Iran regime has always done. They've always had, Big Brother watching, meaning, getting into neighborhoods and creating this grid-like system, meaning you don't know if your own neighbor will be spying against you and reporting you to the authorities and getting some sort of handout, or now going after these shops and restaurants and punishing them in order to have them be their watchdogs and not allow patrons to not wear their hijabs. We are seeing an active revolution in motion in Iran, with the women actually being brave enough to come out without their headscarves to do mundane things like go to school, go supermarket shopping, go to the bank, etc. So the government not being able to control this because they have already, rounded up so many, they've even executed so many of the protesters, but to get a real control over what's going on, they're now going after these small businesses to have them do the dirty work, to have them make people compliant to the rules and laws there. And again, bringing people's attention back to the catalyst that started this revolution this time around 7 months ago was the death of 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian Mahsa Amini, who was arrested and then beaten to death for her improper wear of hijab. She was wearing it very loosely and not compliant with what the Islamic government there wants them to do. So this is obviously a big sensitivity, and that therefore the women of Iran have become this icon, or the fact that women's freedom is at the forefront of this bigger freedom movement is why women are very sensitive to the hijab right now and are not wearing it as a symbol of their freedom.
Sudan's army is appearing to gain an upper hand in a bloody power struggle with rival paramilitary forces pounding their bases with airstrikes. Lisa, there are reports that 97 civilians have been killed and 365 people injured since the fighting in Sudan began.
Yeah, it's going to become bloodier and bloodier. This is picking up momentum. Not too many media outlets covering it. So I thank you, Hal, for bringing attention to it. We don't really pay attention to that part of the world, unfortunately, with Western news outlets. This is an almost civil war. This is an insurgency group that is fighting the country and the military now, as of this morning, having the upper hand. But again, those casualties are rising. Paramilitary group is not going away anytime soon. They're fighting for power. They are fighting to reseat this government, and the military is keeping up. So, of course, this is becoming very bloody, picking up, again, a lot of momentum, and we're keeping our eyes on that. And, of course, that death toll is rising. It's rising as of last night. It grew exponentially, and we'll keep our eyes on it here at the Foreign Desk as well.
Something else I was keeping my eye on was a survey conducted in the fall of 2020 revealed that a large number of people under the age of 40 across North America had no idea about the basic facts surrounding the Holocaust, Lisa. The study was done by researchers with a conference on Jewish material claims against Germany.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Hal, I was having a conversation with a colleague last week and saying, this denial of the Holocaust is going on while we still have the last generation of survivors around. and many of them being in their 90s and even over 100 years old. Now imagine when these individuals pass away and we don't have any first-hand accounts. We don't have the witnesses and the victims who lived through it and saw the horrific parts of the Holocaust. This is modern history. We have everything documented. We have pictures. We have so much in terms of evidence. I mean, who needs to prove such a horrific, historic event that occurred? And of course, this coming on the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day this week, where we hope that the world stops to commemorate and to say never again will hate crimes and hatred for a certain group lead to that kind of just wholesale cleansing, genocide of a people. 6 million died, and many more than that. We know that was just the Jews. We know that there were other minorities who were involved as well. It's horrific to think that Gen Z, millennials, where, education is at a point where we're pushing pronouns and rewriting history in certain cases and canceling history in so many cases. You'd think that they would remember something that wasn't even 100 years ago. So it's really sad and dangerous to think that this is where our young people are at. And I hope that this only motivates people in the place of education, whether that at the high school, middle school, college level, to really, double down and to teach this material. And for groups that are out there to put this up on social media. If you see a post about Holocaust Remembrance Day, retweet that, repost that, put it up on Instagram to let people know about this horrific thing and to say never again, not for Jews or anyone else, never again.
Lisa, the federal election is coming up next year for your country. Let's talk a bit about the fact that Joe Biden says, yep, I'm going to put my name forward as the Democratic candidate one more time. What about Donald Trump? What's the latest with the indictment charges, and where does he stand about becoming the Republican candidate once again?
It's a circus here in the United States with this particular arena, the presidential election. Look, Donald Trump right now is undergoing a lot of scrutiny in terms of his opposition going after him in formal capacities and using and perhaps in certain cases abusing law in order to marginalize him and to diminish his chances at a presidential run. Joe Biden and the Democrats just have to remain silent. That's exactly the tactic that they have chosen, to just stay on the sidelines and perhaps win this just because if Donald Trump's on the ticket, he's hoping he'll just win by not being Donald Trump. It's interesting because we have half the country that is, in love with Donald Trump and think he was the best president that ever was. And on the other half, not really loving Joe Biden or any of his policies, not caring for Kamala Harris. I mean, their approval numbers are abysmal, but just supporting them because they do not want to support Donald Trump. So he's obviously a polarizing character, to say the very least. But, we'll have to watch. We just heard this week that Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, will not be putting his name into the ring. Many others also being fearful of running in 2024 because they just don't think they can run against Donald Trump on the Republican ticket and win because of his popularity across the board. So we'll be watching this closely. We'll see how his legal affairs pan out and if that will make him more popular or less in the long run. And if he stands a chance at being the Republican nominee. And if Joe Biden's going to run against him, we'll see a rematch of what we saw 4 years ago.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Political reporter and host of The Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.